Kendrick drops GNX, gave us Whacked Out Murals, a bunch of amazing songs on GNX, Luther, Gloria, which we'll get to, TV Off, Dodger Blue, Reincarnated, I think can be overlooked. But truly, as someone who knows all of Kendrick's back catalog, even from his old mixtapes, some of the most classic albums. If you listen to Reincarnated over and over, I think this song arguably can be considered one of the most creative songs. It took me weeks to even really come to some semblance of logic from this song. I've heard all the theories and I've listened to them, and I still couldn't make sense of Kendrick's words and what some of the people were claiming on social media. So ultimately, my first theory brought into a second theory that brought it into a third theory after listening to the song over and over. It is what it is. It's a complicated song. And I think this song is going to take a decade to just unravel. And it has this amazing mystery and emotion to it. But ultimately, this song brings me to tears. Anyone else who wants to spend an hour and a half on just talking about Kendrick's song Reincarnated, you're welcome to join me here, or just save this and watch later, come back to this. All right, let's do this. With such a powerful song, there's something important to mention. This song brings up tragedy, traumas, and confusion as to if and which cultural figures of the past Kendrick can be alluding to at times. When bringing up tragedies, I want to ensure that we always uphold the profound impact these musicians had on music and culture with the utmost respect. And at the same time, it's a must that this song has us diving deep into these traumas and these tragedies and trying to explore these things. It's critical to the meaning. In the end, the song is very open to interpretation, and we all won't get every aspect correct because the only person who knows for sure what every bar and metaphor is supposed to represent is Kendrick Lamar. But I believe Kendrick likes to open up his music for interpretation to his fans. And because this song to me is potentially one of Kendrick's most creative songs and also means a lot to me, I hope I touch on it in its most profound fashion. There's different point of views, and I think they all have a place in this song. If anyone has expanded insights, definitely share. Let's gather here, and I'm open to all interpretations. With that being said, let's get started. Let's talk about the Tupac sample. The sample behind this song, along with the spirit behind Kendrick's cadence, is from Tupac's song. This song is on the soundtrack album for the movie Gang-Related, which actually stars Tupac alongside James Belushi in 1997.
What was Tupac like? You worked with him in Gang-Related.
I love Tupac. You know, Tupac was a studied actor. He went to high school performing arts. He was a musician, a writer. It was one of the best working relationships I've had in Gang-Related.
The soundtrack of this album has 3 other songs by Pac if you're interested to check them out. Lost Souls, Life So Hard, and one that I really like called Staring Through My Rear View. Love that song. I think the way Kendrick rapped through the spiritual cadence of how Pac raps in Pac's Made song is something that goes overlooked. It is really, really well done. Kendrick uses a few of the same phrases. You can listen to the first verse of Pac's song and then the first verse of Reincarnated, and the parallel between the two are striking and truly remarkable.
I got this fire burning in me from within. Concentrated thoughts on who I used to be. I'm shedding skin.
My life in exchange for yours. Born hated as a thug. House full of babies crying for my lack of getting love.
And the pros and cons of fame. I don't know how to make friends. I'm a lonely soul.
I heard someone say something interesting, which is how ironic is it that Kendrick was able to bring the spirit of Pac himself, whereas Drake couldn't do it and needed to use AI. And that shows you how much Kendrick truly appreciated Pac. We know that Kendrick in the past once spoke about a vision he had when he was younger of Tupac coming back to him in a vision, telling him, don't let the music die.
A real situation where I was asleep one night, man, and his blur like a silhouette, and he basically said, keep doing what you doing, don't let my music die. And shit scared the shit out of me.
Straight up. I also wondered why Kendrick chose this song in particular. Tupac has hundreds and hundreds of songs. I couldn't necessarily see a clear reason, but in terms of the title of this song by Pac, the phrase made man is related to the American Mafia and means a formerly initiated member of the mob. Tupac is referring to growing up throughout poverty, living the thug life, so to speak, because you're forced to. And it could be that Kendrick uses the spirit of this song to draw parallels between being made or the going through the trauma that Tupac describes in this song that forces you to be a thug, of the trauma that all the reincarnated spirits had to face, which we'll talk about later. And how, like in Tupac's song, you have to try to survive. Kendrick had to go through these traumas and try coming out good in the end. Now, let's talk about some of the theories that are around this song. What I think maybe people generally see superficially and technically about the song, then I'm going to expand on that one to a second one, and then a third theory that I think really brings everything together. So I hope you'll indulge me here. Now, I sat with this song for weeks since the release of GNX, and I wanted to give it its justice. Clearly, whatever it is, I don't think any of them are necessarily wrong or right. I think they all are there, and they all can be, there's aspects to truth to all of them. So let's start with the first theory. Now, the first theory, Reincarnated, is the past life narrative of only two specific Black musicians, and then drawn back to Kendrick Lamar, like verse 1 and verse 2. And then people are arguing, well, who's he talking about verse 1 and who's he talking about verse 2? So one, we have the idea that there's only two single protagonist narratives. And if we go with that, then like I said, people are arguing about who are these two musicians, which I'll get into later. Some say John Lee Hooker is the first verse, Chuck Berry, and others, because of this little discrepancies, people can't be fully sure. For verse 2, some say Billie Holiday or Dinah Washington. And here's the thing, why is it that people can't really decide? That's what's gonna lead me down to the next theory. Now, the second theory, I'm not gonna say my point of view is correct, for sure, because this song is gonna unravel over the next decade, in my opinion. Perhaps this song might be arguably Kendrick's most creative song. But my theory is that Kendrick is not telling only two specific single protagonist narratives. And in other words, stories of two specific musicians that we have to figure out. And I will get into why I think that a little later as I get into the lyrics. But in short, it's because if you take all the story elements that Kendrick describes in those verses, for the first verse and the second verse, they don't necessarily fully attribute or connect to a single historical Black musician, in my opinion. Now, I could be wrong. That's what I'm coming to grips with over weeks of listening and researching on this song. Some elements match, but not all aspects match to any one artist. Quickly, John Lee Hooker. Can we say that John Lee Hooker definitely died with gluttony? He manipulated power. Like, is there enough research to say John Lee Hooker was like that? And then for Billie Holiday or Dinah Washington, we all know that there was addictions and things of that nature. But can we say for sure that it relates to her when that her family turned on her, or that she died with syringes pinched in her, right? So again, all of these could be metaphorical for sure, right? But if we take it for that value, can we really truly attribute that to John Lee Hooker and Billie Holiday or Dinah Washington? That's really the thing, the little, I don't want to say flaw, but the little hole that leads to the next theory. A way to look at this very complex pattern behind this song Reincarnated is that this song, in my opinion, has one massive, powerful narrative, intertwining the diverse traumas experienced by a wide array of older Black musicians in the US. Kendrick, to me, is weaving an intricate tapestry. Rather than focusing on the struggles of just one or two musicians, the song weaves together fragments of pain, resilience, and history, Lego pieces of trauma from many different people, a broader spectrum of collective suffering and survival, and then relates it back into his past, reincarnations, and current life as Kendrick Lamar. Let's just open our minds and explore the intricacies and subtleties Kendrick may be trying to lead us to, potentially a more rich and meaningful discovery behind the song Reincarnated that scopes a medley or a fusion of the culture. Let's hold on to that theory and let's get to the third theory, okay? Because as things unraveled to me, I felt like Kendrick is leading us to this third theory. And we all know that there's this theory of the devil, right? In general, we're also going to get to later past life regressions, because that's an important element to all of this as to how things happen in that hypnotic state. And I think he's bringing that into this song. So if we have this idea of past life regressions and this idea of the devil, that Kendrick Lamar is this humanized version of the devil, let's expand into this third theory. We know at the end he speaks of being the devil because he clearly says, I rewrote the devil's story just to take our power back, Carnated. And that specific verse clearly has a conversation between a father and the son as a representation of God and the devil, because he changes his voice, right? And says, I'm yelling, Father, did I finally get it right? Everything I did was selfless. And God responds later, son, you do well, but your heart is closed, in that other voice. But here's the thing, in the previous verses that some are attributing to John Lee Hooker and Billie Holiday, there are these same references that seem to resonate and could imply that this narrative device of the devil and God's, the conversation, maybe it actually starts in verse 1 and 2. So because in verse 1, Kendrick's still talking about father. He says, my father kicked me out of the house because I wouldn't listen to him. I didn't care about his influence, only love what I was doing.
1947, my father kicked me out the house because I wouldn't listen to him. I didn't care about his influence.
Right? And all of us are like, well, who got kicked out? Is it John Lee Hooker? Is it Kendrick? Maybe here he's talking about God. Or maybe this end story starts in the beginning. Verse 2, the one that people attribute to Billie Holiday or Dinah Washington, also says, my daddy looked the other way. He saw sin in me. I died with syringes pinched in me, reincarnated.
My daddy looked the other way. He saw sin in me. I died.
Then in verse 3, which we all attribute to the God and the devil conversation, he says, my father kicked me out of the house. I finally forgiven. I'm old enough to understand the way I was living. I'm yelling, Father, did I finally get it right? Everything I did was selfless, son. You do well, but your heart is closed. Father, I'm not perfect. I got urges, and so on.
But your pride has to die. Okay, Father, show me how.
So this conversation of Father and the Son essentially starts in verse 1. So we can tie possibly this whole narration, it's in verse 3, back into verse 1 and 2. So what does this mean for this theory? Unlike theories suggesting that each verse represents distinct personas, this interpretation will view the song as one unified flowing narrative where Kendrick himself embodies a humanized version of the devil. Throughout the song, Kendrick appears to channel fragmented traumas through subconscious thought, as though he's undergoing a hypnotic session of past life regression, but it's really about him. And these visions intertwine his own experiences with the collective struggles and wounds of the older Black musicians, weaving their histories into his own perspective and presenting them through his eyes and through the eyes of this humanized devil, who is actually Kendrick. And through this journey, Kendrick explores themes of destruction, enlightenment, and healing, ultimately vowing to break the cycles of pain and trauma to embrace light and transformation, as we see at the end. We know that there's a talk of Isaiah 14. So I'm no theologian on Christianity or anything like that, but I think it's important to note that this chapter primarily focuses on the fall of the oppressive Babylonian Empire and the liberation of God's people, quote unquote, whatever you believe. It includes a taunt against the king of Babylon, which has often been interpreted symbolically to refer to spiritual or cosmic forces like Satan. It says in the Bible, it says, how you have fallen from heaven, morning star, son of the dawn. So how does Kendrick do this? I think we really have to understand a lot of this really has to relate to this theory of concept of past life regression, which we're going to talk about. And exploring the concept that also emboldens the idea that this is a medley of traumas that aren't necessarily on a single plane. Because when you explore this concept of past life regression,
I did past life regression last year and it f***ed me up, reincarnated.
You find that people explore these random traumas in past lives.
I regressed you to another life, another place. Do you want to have a look?
Yes.
Okay. What city are you in?
Jerusalem,
What year are you in?
1206.
Like when you do research on this thing and you watch hypnotic sessions, and I watch some of these sessions, they don't necessarily describe being embodied completely by one person from beginning to end of the session. Let's talk a little about what is past life regression. I think we have to talk about this because it really is deeply infused into this song.
What are the worst psychotherapies that you've seen?
I hate past life regression therapy. It's the worst thing I've ever heard of in my life. It's the idea that someone's trauma or distress that they're experiencing in the current life can be traced to a previous life. It uses hypnosis to regress a person to their past lives so that they could relive that trauma or process that trauma. And I think that idea is terribly exploitive emotionally.
This is a technique that involves hypnosis or guided meditation to help individuals explore supposed past lives, things that they may have gone through in their past or in previous lives.
I remember my mother being gone one night, and they were telling me that she was going to bring a baby home.
About how old are you now?
6.
It's to access memories and experiences from previous lifetimes, to gain insights into one's current life. Now, relate that back to what I mentioned before about the theories, the goal and the humanized version of the devil.
Then, in my guided meditation, my body guided me to whatever memory I first stored. And it seemed like wherever I was, there was a lot more wealth than where I was growing up.
The goal is to uncover and resolve emotional or psychological issues that may stem from these past lives. The experiences recalled can vary and could include different time periods, cultures, and scenarios. Some people may experience these regressions in a linear fashion, recalling a sequence of lifetimes, while others may have more fragmented or symbolic experiences.
Most human minds right now, the way they are, they cannot even handle one lifetime's memory. If you remember 10 lifetimes, your mind will crack up.
And there are 2 points I want to bring up as it relates to this past life regression thing and how it's used in this song, because
hypnosis essentially means that you're not really trying to access reality through hypnosis. If you hypnotize a person, you're not hypnotizing him because you want to take him into reality.
This is super complex, and I have to say, amazing from Kendrick to really tell this story with this infusion of past life regression that many of us are new to. Each past life can provide insights or lessons that might be relevant to the person's current life. That's 1. 2, also, the traumas experienced through past life regression might not necessarily reflect actual past life events, but they could instead be metaphors created by the subconscious mind to help process unresolved emotions or experiences in this life.
Did you see the person doing the man?
It's too far away.
But you couldn't help that woman. You saw it and then you were killed.
If I was gonna die, I could have helped her.
That's why I say maybe some of this stuff that Kendrick's talking about is not, necessarily one person, John Lee Hooker for sure, or this person for sure, but that it's this medley of kind of confusion and different thoughts that are fragmented into one that maybe resemble his own, but also maybe that of many Black musicians back in the days. And that's why I think it's possible that Kendrick is also alluding to his own subconscious mind in the various elements he brings up in the narratives, and they may not necessarily be that of any specific musician. Now, let's talk briefly about reincarnation, because reincarnation is a key element in the song, right?
What Plato says is that after you leave your body on this existence, then you go into some other realm, and after some length of time has elapsed on this earth plane, for some reason you choose to go back. And according to Plato anyway, there is a conscious process in selecting the life that you're going to lead.
So reincarnation is a belief that after death, a person's spirit is reborn into a new body, a new life with new experiences. So the concept of reincarnation is a key element in Hinduism and Buddhism. Now keep this in mind as we lead into Kendrick's lyrics, because that's an important element. The ultimate goal in many of these beliefs is to break free from the cycle of reincarnation and achieve spiritual liberation or enlightenment, as you see happen at the end of this song when Kendrick is having that conversation with God. So there's also the idea in reincarnation that when you reincarnate, you are into a new body, but essentially still the same soul. So the soul is still a thread linking throughout all of the reincarnations. That's another important element to the song. Another aspect I found interesting was Kendrick fusing ideas from 2 different types of religions or ideologies. Like reincarnation is not really in Christianity or Islam. Reincarnation is from Hinduism. He's infusing that with concept from Isaiah 14, which is in Christianity, and the devil's fall from heaven. He's infusing ideas from sort of 2 different kinds of religions. Now we set the mood, we set some context here. We need to really understand, before we really get to these lyrics, I really want you to make sure you go into what I mentioned, theory 1, theory 2, theory 3. Theory 1, that it's just 2 specific musicians leading into Kendrick. Theory 2, everything is a medley of multiple musicians, different traumas from a lot of different older Black musicians leading back into Kendrick. And then the third expanded theory is that it's all really just Kendrick as this humanized version of the devil, and he's himself going through this past life regression hypnosis, and through that hypnosis as the devil, he's re-experiencing all the different traumas that he might have caused as a devil that he faced, but kind of mixed in between the traumas of older Black musicians and his own subconscious thoughts. And then because it's past life regression, it's very confusing, leads back into his conversation with God and trying to seek and gain enlightenment, only to be confronted by God who insists he still has more work to do. Kendrick vows to evolve and ultimately do what is right in God's eyes, right? That's high level what's going on. We need to look at the past life regression, hypnosis, and then we need to understand the concept of reincarnation. All this just for Kendrick. Kendrick, what are you doing to us? Now let's actually get into the lyrics. Now let's get into the first lyric, which is a Spanish lyric, where she says, que reflejan tu mirada la noche tú y yo. I had to speak to Latino folks, I had to do some research, and to be honest with you, this is still kind of a mystery. Not a kind of a mystery, but exactly what it means is not fully clear. So we already know that this is Dara Barrera, as we mentioned in the Whacked Out Murals breakdown, that he saw her at a Dodgers game, brought her in, told her to write some lyrics, and she kind of did these little pieces of lyrics that flowed through some of the songs. I believe Gloria, this song, and Whacked Out Murals. All the translations of this phrase is very literal. In various places, it's translated as that reflect your gaze. The night you and me, right? So people just take it literal, which makes no sense literally, because reflejan is an action. Let's try to translate this in English as something that makes sense. The reflection of your gaze, which when said this way in English sounds more accurate. The night you and me. Or another way, what is reflected in your gaze? The night you and me. Is it the night with us together? Or is it the night you and me did ... right? Like, who knows? Another possible way is that night with you and me, what I saw reflected in your eyes. And to me, that's the closest one I connected with in the end. So we also know in past interviews, Kendrick spoke about a vision he had when he was younger of Tupac coming back to him in a vision, telling him, don't let the music die. So he could be talking about this night between him and Pac and how he saw visions and reflections in Tupac's eyes that empowered him or that he deeply connected with. Now let's get into the lyrics, Kendrick's lyrics. I want to preface this by saying something. I think Kendrick is jumping back and forth between traumas of previous lives and his own, ultimately fusing them to the point that you can't fully tell which are his and which are someone else's. I think that's part of what's causing a lot of people confusion and trying to figure out who he's referencing. But that's sort of the exact thing that happened in past life regression, hypnosis. Is it you? Is it someone else? Is it both? Is it you just making it up? That's part of past life regression hypnosis. And that's why I think that's important to take on with us as we break down the lyrics. I got this fire burning in me from within, concentrated thoughts on who I used to be. I'm shedding skin. Here, Kendrick is introducing the idea of reincarnation and also symbolic foreshadowing. At surface level, Kendrick is saying, I have a passion inside me and something urging me inside. But he says, fire burning. And we know at the end, he brings in the story of the devil, which in some religions can also be connected with the concept of hell in the afterlife. Then he says shedding skin, which foreshadows the concept of reincarnation, the idea of coming back into a new body after death. And this is interesting. He says concentrated thoughts. So what is this fire burning? Sometimes we say, I have a fire burning. It can be likened to love or some yearning. But here Kendrick says the fire burning are these incessant and persistent force of traumas in the past. But here he says, who I used to be. So the reincarnations and previous lives are also a metaphor for Kendrick's past self or former identity that he's steadily trying to evolve from. And him saying shedding skin is also a clear connection between the concept of reincarnation, because he's saying, I have my soul, but my flesh is changing. And I think this whole verse, this first actual verse, is the perfect foreshadow and example of what I said in Theory 3, that the whole song is him being the devil in a way, humanized version of the devil, because I have this fire burning within me, like kind of that metaphor between fire of the devil and that passion. So it's still kind of like the devil in a way. Just a theory. Now, the next lyric. Every day a new version of me, a third of me demented, cemented in pain, juggling the pros and cons of fame. I love this line because again, he's alluding to reincarnation, but also the striving for growth and improvement daily. A third of me demented. Like, why is a third of me demented? I was thinking. And demented is having extreme mental disturbance. And the disease dementia, it's a horrible disease, is when someone's brain deteriorates and the cognitive functioning is no longer working properly. So it's like Kendrick saying, through every reincarnation and through every attempt at getting better, I'm haunted by or still carrying a traumatic piece of the past that is essentially a form of torment. I die and come back. I try evolving away from past identities and devilish ideas into something better, but somehow a third of me still identifies with that old identity that is demented. And because of that, I'm cemented in pain. I live through pain because I just can't get rid of it. That other piece that is being reincarnated inside you. Then he starts drawing parallels from that idea to something real in his life, juggling the pros and cons of fame. That's why, again, another clue in that this is all about Kendrick himself, but also, again, about other older black musicians. In the first few bars, I think Kendrick is foreshadowing the entire concept that he's talking about himself, his own subconscious thoughts, but again, also infusing subtle hints at what people before him faced. Next line. I don't know how to make friends. I'm a lonely soul. I recollect this isolation. I was 4 years old. Truth be told, I've been battling my soul, trying to navigate the real and fake, cynical about the judgment day. Here, Kendrick starts talking about experiences as it relates to his upbringing, that he always felt alone, even as a kid, at least in this example, in this memory. I'm not saying Kendrick himself necessarily felt alone. In his idea of this person, this character, he always felt alone, even as a kid at 4 years old, trying to navigate the difference between good and evil, truth and lies. But I also believe that as we connect the lines later about past life regression, I think Kendrick might be talking about an experience that came up through a hypnotic session that maybe brought him back to those feelings of isolation around that age, or that he himself was a devil at the time, like the devil, if going to that religious ideology, like how he was kicked out, how he struggled to find the identity maybe. And many people today do feel lonely. And there is research and anecdotal evidence suggesting that highly intelligent or conscientious individuals may experience loneliness more often or more intensely. And there's a study that explains how loneliness doesn't necessarily mean being physically alone or by yourself, but more so it could be a state of mind. An article at the Psychology Spot says, quote unquote, the smartest people feel more anxiety than the others because they brood constantly all mundane situations. They get worried more often and for more things. So if something negative happens, they tend to ruminate what happened, and that generates their anxiety. End quote. Interesting how that reflects a lot of what's going on in this song. Kendrick says, cynical about the judgment day, a line that I find particularly thought-provoking. Here, Kendrick delves into the internal conflict and spiritual struggle that he faces as himself, maybe as the devil, or maybe as some of these people in the culture from back in the days. He appears torn between belief and skepticism. He seems to ask himself, am I doing the right thing? Will I be judged for my actions? Is there truth to the idea of judgment for my past sins? His cynicism toward Judgment Day doesn't necessarily reflect disbelief, but rather a negative, perhaps disillusioned perspective on the concept itself. It suggests he feels conflicted or even deterred by the weight of moral and spiritual accountability. Next verse. I did past life regression last year and it effed me up. Reincarnated on this earth for 100 plus. And the way he's saying these lines are just so fierce. His vocals are just so well done. There's such aggression in them.
Reincarnated on this earth for 100 plus. Body at the body.
So here, Kendrick revisits the concept that we discussed earlier, past life regression, hypnosis therapy, and he weaves it seamlessly into the religious or spiritual idea of reincarnation. Now, as I mentioned, past life regression is a form of hypnotic therapy where you explore memories and experiences of previous lifetimes to uncover current challenges that may be rooted in a past life. Interestingly, Kendrick says, past life progression. That's what I'm hearing. He could be saying past life regression. I'm hearing he's saying past life progression, not past life regression, which is that form of therapy, hypnosis. It's not called progression. If that's the case, if I'm wrong, that's fine, but that's what I'm hearing. And a lot of the lyrics say that he's saying past life progression. So why does he say that? Why does he call it that? Why not just call it for what it is? I think he's definitely referring to the concept, but doing a play on words. That the word regression is going backwards, which is what you are doing. Whereas the word progression is about advancing forwards. So he does this to twist the idea, right? It's Kendrick, and he's still got to twist the idea that's already known, flipping it on its head. That I'm doing this, and it was painful, but it's also foreshadowing for what happens at the end of the song. That all this past life exploration wasn't regression, but it was actually progression. Me progressing, me evolving to the next layer of myself. And the only way to do this is to go into the end of that last verse where we see he's evolving as he has that conversation with God, which we'll get into later. Also, maybe it's just another way of Kendrick being the rebel that he is. Like, I'm literally going to take this known concept and reword in my own way based on how I saw it. Now for the powerful meaning behind this line. Remember, this line to me is a key to understanding the narratives in the upcoming lines, that in this concept, the memories stemming from past life regression can be narratives created by the subconscious mind, which is why in the next lines, I see the traumas Kendrick describes is like a tapestry from many different Black musicians and also from Kendrick's own subconscious mind.
Last night, what I discovered is that I suffered immensely and I would just punish myself. I go into these I hate myself, self-destructive modes because I believe I deserve it because of what I have done. And I just saw myself I can't even explain it. It's this sort of like disturbing vision I can even go to right now in my head of just seeing myself go through that. I felt bad for this other version of myself. I felt horrible. I was like, man, you are just torturing yourself. Why are you...
For the line reincarnated on this earth for 100 plus, another clue in. It's interesting because Kendrick is giving us a time frame here to work with. Like we can start from this year and then go back 100 years. So if it's 2024, it would be 1924. Or we can go 100 years from Kendrick's birth year, which was 1987, which would go as far back as 1887. And this is also a good point because the Chitlin Circuit, which he references later, started around that time, the early 1900s, at the height of these Jim Crow laws, which we'll get into later in the US. Next line. Body after body, lesson after lesson. Let's take it back to Michigan in 1947. Here, Kendrick is showing that there are several reincarnations he's gone through in the past life regression. This is also another clue that may support the theory that Kendrick is referring to traumas from many past life musicians, not only those two, Johnny Hooker and Billie Holiday, because he says body after body, lesson after lesson. In other words, many bodies and many lessons experienced. Then he is referencing Michigan 1947. Now, this is the first element in the story that many refer to as the first person or first narrative. Many videos are suggesting that it is Johnny Hooker, but as I mentioned previously, that might very well be the case here, but keep in mind that as the elements continue, they don't all seem to coincide with Johnny Hooker's life. So further elements may be referring to other musicians. Why does Kendrick refer to Michigan here, right? That's interesting. One, at the literal level, as people want to attribute this narrative to a specific musician, people are saying Johnny Hooker, as I mentioned. And the only thing that relates here to Johnny Hooker, in my opinion, is that he worked in factories and played in Detroit clubs in the 40s, right? In Michigan. And there are some reports that say at a young age of 14, he ran away from home, but that was in the 1930s, not in the 40s from my research. Then there's also the idea that I mentioned that a lot of times I think this running away from home is also really the foreshadowing of the devil getting kicked out of heaven by God. But why mention Michigan specifically? I thought like if this was going to be a fragmented thing and just random subconscious thought, not necessarily that of Johnny Hooker, why Michigan? I think Kendrick is using Michigan here either to reference a musician from Michigan that maybe we're trying to figure out, potentially musicians from Michigan, and the idea that Detroit at one point itself was a significant hub for the Great Migration in the US. That happened in the 1900s, where millions of black Southerners moved out of the South, entrenched by the Jim Crow laws, up to the largest urban areas of the North, and Detroit, Michigan was a big part of that. So Detroit was also home of the Ford Motor Company, which hired many people, and it was reported that Johnny Hooker also worked at a Ford factory in Detroit. Interesting clue in there. And another idea is that blues music really thrived in Detroit, especially as a result of that first wave of the Great Migration of Black Americans from the Deep South. And of course, Johnny Hooker was one of the great Black musicians who migrated to Detroit from Mississippi. Some other notable notes about Detroit is that Berry Gordy was from Detroit, who started Motown Records. Aretha Franklin is from Detroit, and Stevie Wonder and Diana Ross are also from Detroit. And this is important because I think Kendrick is using Michigan not only as an element to the narrative that may be related to Johnny Hooker or any other musician, but more so that it's a hub to represent like a cultural hub, a significant place that the person or the people that he's reflecting the narrative came from. Now let's look at the next verse, and we're going to come back to Michigan. My father kicked me out the house because I wouldn't listen to him. I didn't care about his influence, only love what I was doing. Gifted as a musician, I played guitar in the grand level. The most talented where I'm from, so I had to rebel. Now we have the first set of elements in the story that we're all trying to make sense of. We have Michigan, running away from home, rebelling, playing the guitar, being in search of identity. But let's explore some of these ideas. One, if we say it's Johnny Hooker was a seminal American blues singer, songwriter, and guitarist. In the 1930s, he moved to Tennessee, performing at local house parties, and in 1943, he relocated to Detroit, working in factories, including the Ford Motor Company, while also immersing himself in the city's vibrant blues scene. He had a hit single called Boogie Chillin' in 1948.
Stay out all night long. I would boogie down.
The lyrics are kind of interesting. He says, well, my mama didn't allow me just to stay out all night long. Oh Lord, I didn't care what she didn't allow. I would boogie woogie anyhow. I heard Papa tell Mama, let that boy boogie woogie. It's in him. And it got to come out, and it felt so good. Interesting play on rebellion here, right? As that being one of Johnny Hooker's songs, that there's this concept of rebellion in this verse itself. And in this, the whole string of first verses, rebelling against what your parents tell you that you should do or shouldn't do. Or also, if we go with that third theory, rebelling against God as the humanized version of the devil. John Lee Hooker himself was inducted into the Blues Hall of Fame in 1980 and the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame in 1991. He has a star on the Hollywood Walk of Fame, interesting point. And this song, Boogie Chillin', was recognized in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame's list as one of the 500 songs that shaped rock. And a lot of singles from these artists that I will bring up were recognized in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame as well, which is very interesting. Here's the thing with Johnny Hooker. He died in his sleep. And the Devil's Theory, Isaiah 14, in the lines 12 through 16, it says, how you have fallen from heaven, morning star, son of the dawn. You have been cast down to the earth, who once laid low the nations. You said in your heart, I will ascend to the heavens. I will raise my throne above the stars of God. I will ascend above the tops of the clouds. I will make myself like the Most High. But you are brought down to the realm of the dead, to the depths of the pit. Now, this is going to be really interesting as it gets to the end. That's why I think we bring back this concept of rebellion. Could be John Lee Hooker, could be other musicians, could be the devil himself as the metaphor of Kendrick. Next line. And so I'm off in the sunset, searching for my place in the world with my guitar up on my hip. That's a story unfurled. I found myself with a pocket full of money and a whole lot of respect while the record vendors love me. Here, Kendrick is talking about the concept now of finding your identity. Now we're getting into that concept. In search of purpose and meaning with your heart and your talents. As I mentioned, these can be subconscious reflections of Kendrick himself, John Lee Hooker, or the array of things experienced by other black musicians of the past. And I think Kendrick wants us to explore these ideas. So who was kicked out of their house when they were younger? One, the devil was. And that's why I think a lot of this is that devil. Another little interesting clue, just a little side note, Little Richard, also, it's reported that he was kicked out of his family home when he was 15 because of effeminate mannerisms and things like that, like homosexuality at that time, super frowned upon and very hard to come out of the closet in a way. He died in 2020, and one of his hit songs were Tutti Frutti, which is still very classic, popular song.
Rhythm and blues had that baby, and they called it rock and roll. I just want you to know that. Are you having a good time?
Now, Billie Holiday also, this isn't going to be a full biography. I'm going to touch back on Billie Holiday towards the end, but she also had a complex, tumultuous life. But just as it relates to this part, not long after Holiday was born, her father abandoned his family to pursue a career as a jazz banjo player and guitarist. That's something not really well known about Billie Holiday.
Holiday's early years were mostly rumors because of her ghost-written autobiography, Lady Sings the Blues. But it would be honest to say that she did not have a stable early life. Her mother, Sadie Fagan, was only a teenager when she had her, and her father was widely believed to be Clarence Holiday, who would eventually become a successful jazz singer and play guitar for pianist Fletcher Henderson. He was an infrequent visitor in Eleanor's life growing up. Many times Eleanor was left to the care of other people, and she started skipping school.
Vanity Fair reports that she was sent to a severe Catholic reformatory where, for punishment, she was locked in a room with a dead student. But she has a lot of traumas that get reflected through this song. Then this idea of being abandoned, I think, is reflected in these musicians. As for guitarists, right now we get to the idea that we're talking about a guitarist. Some of the most well-known black guitarists, they are Jimi Hendrix, Chuck Berry, Freddie King, B.B. King, and John Lee Hooker. And Muddy Waters also actually purchased his first guitar by age 17. Even Prince was known to be a really good guitarist. I'm not necessarily saying that he's talking about Jimi Hendrix here or he's talking about so-and-so. I think Kendrick wants us to explore these traumas. Jimi Hendrix also had a tumultuous relationship with his parents. It said he often lived in the care of relatives or acquaintances, that he had a rough relationship with his father who left the family, and his mother had him when she was 17. When Hendrix was 16, he got his first acoustic guitar, and the next year, his first electric guitar. Jimi Hendrix also played guitar for Little Richard, Little Richard I brought up a little earlier, right? Kind of interesting.
Baby, 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 I feel so all alone.
Really what I wanted to talk about is that infusion of that rebellion and being abandoned by family that is really Kendrick is talking about here in this line. Freddie King, when Freddie was 6 years old, his mother and his uncle taught him to play the guitar. That's another interesting part. So the guitarist, I wonder again, is it really just Johnny Hooker? Is it these older black musicians? Is it Kendrick? Is it the devil himself, right? A lot of interesting things here. Next line. I was head of rhythm and blues, the women that fell to their feet, so many to choose, but I manipulated power as I lied to the masses. Died with my money gluttony was too attractive. Reincarnated. And this is the part that really starts to make you wonder, who are we talking about? I believe many of these lyrics blend Kendrick's subconscious thoughts with parallels to, like I said, a rich medley of older black musicians and cultural figures. So who were heads of rhythm and blues, right? If we say the heads of rhythm, had women at their feet, who manipulated power, who lied to the masses, who died with money. Was it necessarily Johnny Hooker? Well, to be honest, probably many of the older musicians did. And without taking anything away from how great these musicians were, or the impact that they had on culture and music, which was significant on all music, many of them, like all humans, had this dark side. And I think this song, what made this song really difficult for me was tapping into that dark side that you got very kind of a little sad and depressing, getting into those traumas that some of these great older black musicians had faced. And I think Kendrick is just painting this concept through these subconscious thoughts. Kendrick wants us to look through these traumas. It doesn't need to correspond exactly to a real life situation. It can serve as a deeper and broader reflection of themes. So let's explore those things. Now, one disclaimer I always want to say as we get through the song, these people are some of the greats. And I don't want to take away anything from their huge impact on the culture and music. But Reincarnated is about exploring. It's reliving through these traumas. That's exactly what Kendrick is doing, to bring us back into goodness, to shed that skin. So Marvin Gaye was once called the Prince of Motown and the Prince of Soul. He started singing in church when he was only 4 years old and grew up in a strict religious Pentecostal home. They were so religious that Marvin Gaye would get whippings by his father, some reports show. He saw his father as a cruel king. Nevertheless, Marvin Gaye continued following his musical path and he found success. But imagine going through that rebellion, right? That abandonment from your parents, your family. You have to rebel to get through, right? A lot of what this song is talking about.
I just want to ask the question, who really cares to save a world in despair?
In 1971, he signed a deal worth $1 million with Motown, which would be considered several $1 million today. Let's Get It On, the song by Marvin Gaye. You gotta know that classic song, no matter what decade you're in.
I've been really trying, baby.
Let's Get It On was one of his biggest hits. And imagine that coming from that strict religious background, dropping that song. Marvin Gaye actually, interestingly, married Berry Gordy's sister. As we mentioned, Berry Gordy was the founder of Motown Records, but they later separated. But this is really interesting as it relates to this story that Kendrick's telling. Is that one day on April 1st in 1984, the great Marvin Gaye, Marvin Gaye's parents were in a heated exchange for which Marvin Gaye then intervened. Marvin Gaye's father actually let off 2 gunshots, striking Marvin Gaye in the chest through his heart. Marvin Gaye left this earth by the hands of his own father, Marvin Gaye. And it's deeply, I mean, one thing traumatizing, and just revealing that he had to go through all that. And then there's even clips of him with his father who was trying to urge him and kind of accept him.
I think you're one for myself. As long as I know you have a humble mind, and as long as you know there's a guard upstairs, you can call on him and respect the people, I think you're a real wonderful person. I'm going to give that to you as my son. And I'm proud of you, really am.
And he wanted his father's acceptance, which is another theme in this song Reincarnated. But he was taken out by his own father in the end. Chuck Berry was nicknamed the father of rock and roll and was one of the first musicians to be inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame in '86.
Chuck, it's Marvin, your cousin Marvin Berry. You know that new sound you looking for? Well, listen to this.
It was said that he was the one who took rhythm and blues and transformed it into a new genre that would forever change popular music. Chuck Berry. Berry was born in 1926 and actually passed not long ago in 2017. He was on the Rolling Stone list as another interesting thing, as one of the greatest of all time musicians. One night he was found unresponsive, which seems to be of a heart attack at the age of 90, and he was buried with his red Gibson guitar in his casket, which can be seen at his funeral viewing. It's said that his estate was worth $50 million. B.B. King was a blues guitarist born in 1925.
Been downhearted, baby, ever since the day we met.
He was also inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame as well. In the 40s and 50s, he was a major part of the blues scene. He died in his sleep at age 89, and it was said that he fathered 15 children. And when he died, 11 of the children sued to gain parts of his $30 million estate. B.B. King, born on a plantation, B.B. King still rose above such difficult beginnings to accomplish greatness. And I think this is the part that I'm enthralled with from exploring these theories of traumas. Jimi Hendrix. Jimi Hendrix was known to be considered one of the greatest guitarists in history. Born in 1942. Then on one fateful night, 1970, Monika Denneman, a German figure skater, his last girlfriend at the time, drove him to a friend's house, then picked him up, went back to their place by 3 a.m., and then they stayed up until 7 a.m. talking. And when they slept, she woke up at 11 a.m. and looked over and found Jimi Hendrix unconscious. She called the paramedics and he was pronounced dead. The post-mortem examination concluded that he died of basically suffocation by his own vomit because he was so intoxicated. But they left it open because they didn't have enough evidence. They weren't, completely sure. But later on, his girlfriend Denneman later revealed that Hendrix had taken 9 of her prescription sleeping pills. And Jimi Hendrix was only 27 years old, known as one of the greatest guitarists. Ray Charles, who everyone must know, who lost his sight. Ray Charles lost his brother at the age of 4 to drowning in front of his eyes. He lost his sight at the age of 5 and became blind by 8. His mother died when he was 15, and then he toured on the Chitlin Circuit in the South. And at 73, he died from liver failure. But one of the significant traumas that he faced was watching his own brother drown in a tub. And the significance of all these musicians, I feel like Kendrick wants us to explore all these, and nothing to me really leads back to a single person. It's just this exploration of trauma from these musicians that gets reincarnated into every person, and specifically Kendrick. Next line. Now we get to what we consider verse 2, which a lot of people have been attributing to Billie Holiday, but as I mentioned before, all my theories, theory 1, theory 2, theory 3, which you go back to, that this is a broader exploration of many musicians and the devil himself through Kendrick's subconscious thoughts. Another life had placed me as a black woman in a Chitlin Circuit, seductive vocalist as a promoter hit the curtains. So let's talk a little bit about the Chitlin Circuit. Anyone from the US knows disgusting history of slavery and racism against Black Americans and racism against people of color in general. Before this, we need to look at Jim Crow. In 1836, this character Jim Crow was born, which was a caricature created by Thomas Dartmouth. Essentially, he was entertaining white Americans in blackface, acting like a buffoon as a slave on a plantation, naming himself Jim Crow. But Jim Crow became the symbol of racial segregation in America. And this time is really critical, like talking about like what these Jim Crow laws and the Chitlin Circuit is critical, because that's the Chitlin Circuit started at that time. Slavery was technically abolished in 1865. And this era of Jim Crow was basically an American form of racial apartheid after slavery technically ended, which was an attempt to uphold white supremacy all the way until the 50s, arguably all the way till today, still in effect in discrete ways. During that era, full separation between black and white, transportation, hotels, bathrooms, the 50s. And that's why I think this is important, because Kendrick says, he does mention right in the beginning where he says reincarnated on this earth for 100 plus, right? That's why I think this is good, because it clues into the time periods. Now we can get to the Chitlin Circuit, right? Based on this crap that is going on in the US. Since we had this ridiculous situation of separation of black and white, the Chitlin Circuit was essentially a network of entertainment venues providing a safe space for black entertainers to perform during this time period. Many people performed on what was known as the Chitlin Circuit. Ray Charles, B.B. King, Aretha Franklin, Jimi Hendrix, and Tina Turner, Billie Holiday, and more. But the Chitlin Circuit was really a coined term by the performers themselves that started to go mainstream when it was heard through the newspapers in the 60s. Lou Rawls, he said, quote unquote, "For years, I played nightclubs, working the Chitlin Circuit. These clubs were very small, very tight, very crowded, and very loud." Now let's look at this verse now. Let's look at the broad lyrics and break down themes. Is this Billie Holiday? Let's look at these lyrics as a collective. Seductive vocalist as a promoter hit the curtains. My voice was angelic, straight from heaven. The crowd sobbed. A musical genius, what the articles emphasized. Had everything I wanted, but I couldn't escape addiction. Hills had me in fetal positions, restricted. Turn on my family, I whenever cameras be. No private planes for my insanity. Self-indulge. Discipline never been my sentiment since I needed drugs. To me, an apple was like penicillin, F-love. My happiness was in that brown sugar. Sex and melodies gave me hope when nobody was looking. My first assistant was a small town scholar, never did a quaalude till I got myself around her. My daddy looked the other way, he saw sin in me. A dire whisper pinched in me. Reincarnated. Let's look at this more so from the themes that this verse gives us and try and find connections with older black musicians, Kendrick's subconscious thoughts, and that humanized version of the devil. Because ultimately, I really think that we can't fully attribute this to Billie Holiday or Dinah Washington, as some are saying, but that they are a medley of those traumas, but also sort of parallel retelling of the devil's story of being kicked out of heaven and those subconscious thoughts of Kendrick happening throughout all of this, as I mentioned before, the past life regression, chaotic hypnosis therapy, right? That all this is kind of this really strange creative medley of traumas being put together. Ultimately, if we look at all these lines, here are the themes. One, black female musician. Chitlin Circuit. Audiences cried. Addiction. Heroin. Focus more on fame than family. Self-indulge. Sex and music. My daddy looked the other way. Father. God. I died with syringes. There's no doubt that we should look at Billie Holiday's life. Well, I don't think the entire verse is Billie Holiday, as I mentioned. Billie Holiday is essential to look at. Here are some of the traumas that do resemble her issues. Billie Holiday had a complex and tumultuous life. Not long after Holiday was born, her father abandoned his family to pursue a career as a jazz banjo player and guitarist. Reports say a neighbor attempted to RP her. At age 10, then she was sent into protective custody as a state witness for that case. And she was RP'd, it's reported in some articles, by a trumpet player. At age 12, Vanity Fair magazine reports that she was sent to a severe Catholic reformatory where for punishment, she was locked in a room with a dead student. Billie Holiday had this amazing song called Strange Fruit, which was about lynchings of black people in the US. And there's a movie you could see that portrays some of this documentation that the government was really after her and wanted her to stop singing this song. And she infused such emotion in her music. And the government, they really want to plot against her. They want to find a way to bring her down. Ultimately, she did have addictions that were described in Kendrick's verse, but she didn't necessarily die from like heroin per se. That she had, I think, cirrhosis of the liver. There was a lot of liquor involved, things like that. So obviously, there could be this fusion of all these problems. But one of her songs was actually used in the movie Notebook in one of the biggest scenes that a lot of people, probably don't even know it's Billie Holiday.
Always think of you that way.
And if you go back and listen to her music, such emotional, vocals that she provides. So it's important to shed light on her, on Billie Holiday, and those traumas that she faced, being sought after by the feds, trying to bring down her name, trying to pin her as this addict and nothing else, just an attempt to stop her from singing an emphatic song. And Holiday was also known as Lady Day. She was immensely popular because of her unique voice. She had this emotional delivery and her ability to infuse personal pain and depth into her music. And she really emerged during the swing era of the 30s and 40s, a time when jazz was at the height of its popularity. But it also was that era of racial segregation. Unlike a lot of the vocalists, they focused on technical prowess. Holiday, she emphasized that emotional resonance. She had this way of bending the melody that it just made her songs unforgettable. And she ultimately bridged the gap between jazz and blues. Again, as I mentioned, I think it's important to explore some of the traumas of some of these older musicians. And I think Whitney Houston is one to look at. Yes, is this verse talking about Whitney Houston per se? Not necessarily, but I don't think it's necessarily only talking about Billie Holiday. And I don't think it's necessarily speaking of something specific. I think there's just this medley. I think it's also infused with the devil's story. I think it's infused with Kendrick's subconscious thoughts. Whitney Houston, at age 15, was singing with her mother, trying to get a record deal. In high school, she sang backup for Chaka Khan and Lou Rawls. One day, she was discovered by a photographer who saw her natural beauty, and she was one of the first Black American women on the cover of the magazine 17. But her main passion was still music. And when she was 19, she was discovered in a nightclub by Clive Davis. In 1985, she released that first super iconic album entitled Whitney Houston, which was a pop sensation. It had hit singles, How Will I Know, and Saving All My Love for You, which won a Grammy in 1986. Iconic, classic songs on her first album. In 1992, she married and this may be the stuff that maybe people do know, she married that pop star Bobby Brown, who's also another iconic legend in R&B. And their relationship was also considered tumultuous. And based on, the tabloids, it was filled with turmoil. They eventually divorced in 2007. But here's the thing, as relates to all these traumas that I think Kendrick is kind of sort of trying to guide us through. One day in February 2012, she was in her bathtub, and people don't know exactly. The cause of death was accidental drowning with heart disease. What they found in her system is what caused that accidental drowning. She died in that bathtub.
When she didn't answer, she went in and found the superstar face up in the water-filled tub. She and the bodyguard pulled Whitney out, called 911, and frantically tried to revive her. But it was too late.
She was only 48 years old. And it's not clear how she died for certain. They definitely found different kind of in her system before death. It can be speculated that it put her to sleep where she couldn't wake up and she accidentally drowned. And it was officially listed as an accident, quote unquote. What a sad way to see one of the greatest go out. In a very strange irony, she had one child, only child, with Bobby Brown. In January of 2015, Houston's only child with Bobby Brown, whose name was Bobby Christina Brown. One day, January 31st, she was found face down, unconscious, in a bathtub at her home near Atlanta. She remained in a coma for 6 months. There was an induced coma, but that they couldn't really get her back together. 6 months after that, where she died in July of that same year. So the death is somewhat mysterious, where it seems she did drown by being intoxicated of an array of drugs. Her father, Bobby Brown, actually seemed to believe that she was abused by her boyfriend, Nick Gordon, and that he was to blame for her death. There was a civil lawsuit brought against him by her estate, for which he was in fact claimed legally responsible for her death. Then he himself, in January 2022, died from an overdose. Whitney Houston was just one of the greats. I just found it so dark and really eerie that one, we lost her that way, and then her daughter, who was young in her 20s, died in a similar fashion. Then Dinah Washington, some try to attribute this verse to Dinah Washington, who was primarily a jazz vocalist. She also had a song called TV is the Thing this year, listed by the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame as one of the songs that shaped rock and roll, Dinah Washington. In 1963, she was pronounced dead at the scene at age 39. Another strange incident that seems similar to these other musicians. Lethal combination of prescription drugs. And some people attribute this verse to Dinah Washington because Kendrick says, never did a Quaalude till I got myself around her. A Quaalude is a brand name for a drug made for insomnia, which Dinah Washington was also known to have died from. That's speculation she died from. But again, not a whole lot is documented about Dinah Washington. So that's what makes it really hard for people to feel like, how can you feel that confident to say it was her, it was Billie Holiday, it was this person, when there's so many elements here in this story that don't fully relate to one single artist. Now let's get to verse 3. To be honest with you, I was in tears from this verse. The conversation that Kendrick's having with God and the change of voice and what is being said just had me super emotional. All right, so we get to this verse. My present life is Kendrick Lamar, and you hear the music sort of change here, more happy, joyous. A rapper looking at the lyrics to keep you in awe. The only factor I respected was raising the bar. My instinct sent material straight to the charts. All right, now Kendrick is bringing us back into the present, describing himself after all these reincarnations. He's back to himself, but still with a piece of those older black musicians and his subconscious thoughts and all the traumas, that he is someone who uses his words in music to shock people. I like that he says, a rapper looking at the lyrics to keep you in awe. But what does awe mean? The textbook definition is a feeling of reverential respect mixed with fear or wonder. So let's come back to this, because later we will get back to the word fear as used at the end of the song. So here he's saying, I use my lyrics to keep people in fear and wonder of me. Something God will call him out later for in the song, because remember at the end, God says, you manipulated man, for which Kendrick will respond, I learned a lot, no more putting these people in fear. There's some foreshadowing here to how he keeps people in fear through his lyrics, but in awe. A nice double entendre also, because he says, my only factor was raising the bar. Raising the bar is a phrase that means setting and trying to surpass higher and higher expectations, but raising the bar. And in rap lyricism, I got loyalty, got royalty inside my DNA, right? A bar. So raising the bar, lyricism, and raising expectations. So bar and bar. And we hear some light alliteration. I think it's important to mention because it's dope, as Kendrick does. The only factor I respected was raising the bar. Respected, raising. And Kendrick is a master at alliteration, because in Rigor Mortis, the song off of the Section 80 album, he goes,
I cracked the egg in your basket, you bastard. I'm Marilyn Manson with madness. Now just imagine the magic.
Crack the egg in your basket, you bastard. I'm Marilyn Manson with madness. Now just imagine the magic. I mean, I mean, this is light work for Kendrick at this point, but all right, next line. Now I see this as Kendrick being the devil here, where he says, my father kicked me out the house, I finally forgive him. I'm old enough to understand the way I was living. Ego and pride had me looking at him with resentment. Like when you hear it, you're like, literally? Was Kendrick, from what I know, I don't think he ever spoke about him being kicked out of the house. We have to look at this from the lens that we already know that Kendrick says at the end, I rewrote the story of the devil. That here, it's like he's saying, as the devil, my God kicked me out, and I finally forgive God because I understand what I was doing wrong. And now this line, because very interestingly, the concept is referenced multiple times even earlier in the song, where Kendrick may be talking about himself, his own subconscious thoughts, traumas of the older Black musicians, but also drawing a parallel between the struggles humankind faces with that of the devil getting kicked out by God, potentially the Father. Because in verse 1, we have where he says, my father kicked me out the house because I wouldn't listen to him. I didn't care about his influence, only loved what I was doing. Could be referencing the devil here. And in verse 2, my daddy looked the other way. He saw sin in me. I died with syringes pinched in me. Reincarnated. We'll be talking about the devil. And this is a big clue in that perhaps the entire song is a narrative about Kendrick himself, while of course weaving in past generational traumas as experienced through past life regressions, but a metaphor for being the devil himself throughout the whole song. So here Kendrick as the devil is saying he knows why God kicked him out and cast him away, because he realized his evil ways, and it was his ego and pride, which the devil is known for, that led him to continue blaming and hating God for being cast away. But here is the first form of acceptance and realizing one's mistakes of the devil. And in a way, Kendrick is also referring to himself deep down, some aspect of him which he can't truly know, but I think anyone can relate to. The part of you that only you knows about, the secrets you hide and only you know about. Next verse. Again, Kendrick as the devil. I close my eyes hoping that I don't come off contentious. I'm yelling, Father, did I finally get it right? Everything I did was selfless. I spoke freely when the people needed me. I helped them. I didn't gloat, even told them no when the vultures came, took control of my fleshly body when the money changed. Here a little bit of ego here, right? And which it's going to get to at the end of the verse. Even though Kendrick says he realizes the mistakes he made, or the devil has realized evil here, we see it still potentially being concealed, right? As we'll see how God replies to this verse. He's trying to admit his sins, but you could see that still ego resides in the reply, right? Because he's saying, but didn't I get it right? Isn't it true that I did all these things for others? I helped people who needed me. I stayed true. I didn't let money change me. So again, it's like I feel and receive what he's saying, but it's like Kendrick wants to show that there's still something being hidden. There's still ego, pride residing in the answer, because it's very difficult for any human being to say, I did all this for everyone. I was completely unselfish. And how do we know this? Because in the next line, God replies, son, you do well, but your heart is closed. I can tell residue that linger from your past creates a cell. So God responds, yes, you did okay. You tried, but your heart is closed. And this response was interesting because everything Kendrick in the previous line speaks about seems to send a message that he is fully filled with warmth, right? I did all this. I'm such a good person. But then God to just respond, your heart is closed. And all the evils of the past have created a wall around your heart. Maybe you did some stuff good, but the truth is your heart is blocked. Like imagine being told that by God after you say, I did all this stuff, your heart is closed. I love this line because I can feel this. Sometimes you try to do good, but your heart, if someone were to really get to the heart of the matter, for lack of better words, your heart's not really in it. And here God is trying to teach this devil or Kendrick that it's not just doing X, Y, Z. Your heart has to be fully in it. Pure intentions. Next line, as Kendrick the devil then responds, Father, I'm not perfect. I got urges, but I hold them down. But your pride has to die. Okay, Father, show me how. What a great way you can see the transition of the devil trying to come to grips and also evolve his words into, he's revealing more truths as God is like questioning him. Because now he's saying, okay, Father, you're right. I'm not perfect. I got urges, but I do hold them down. And this is nice because Kendrick is now trying to go one step higher. First, he says he admitted his pride. Then he says, but I did all this good, Father. And after the Father's response, he says, okay, I'm not saying I'm perfect, but I try. And here we get to the heart of the matter, which is pride. God responds by saying, your pride has to completely go. Then he asks God to show him the way. And to step aside here, for example, I do remember Kendrick had that amazing album, right? Damn, in 2017, where he named every song a particular emotion. But he does have a song called Pride. And he also has a song called Fear and a song called God, which is interesting. But in Pride, he says, Love's gonna get you killed, but pride's gonna be the death of you and me. So all this comes full circle. Maybe my full heart is never really into everything. That's what God is telling me. All right, next line. Tell me every deed that you done and what you did it for. And then now this is a conversation back and forth. Kendrick says, I kept 100 institutions paid. Okay, tell me more. I put 100 hoods on one stage. Okay, tell me more. I'm trying to push peace in LA, but you love war. No, I don't. Oh, yes, you do. I love this conversation, right? This is ultimately one of the greatest clues that this whole song is Kendrick as the devil, because he's clearly bringing in references we know. Like, I put 100 hoods on one stage that we know at the pop-out concert. So it's interesting here that God asked him, okay, so you want to get rid of your pride. Let's start by you telling me, what did you do and why? What did you do it for? Is the interesting thing here, because he's telling him, don't just tell me what you did. Tell me why. Because a lot of people can do good things, but oftentimes there are hidden motives. Really interesting thing I think Kendrick is teaching through this song. Sometimes rich people donate to charity at the end of the year. You know why? To get rid of money, to save on taxes. It's not done for the people, it's for tax benefits. Getting rid of some of that extra cash that you're gonna be taxed for anyway. And at the same time, you get the tax benefits for doing donations. Now, I'm not saying everyone, I'm just saying as like a general sense. Ultimately, this is what I think Kendrick's like an example of what could be questioned. And people are nice usually because they want something from others. It's very hard to find someone super sincere just for being sincere. They call you because they want something from you. They give you something because they want you to be in debt back to them in some way to repay them when they want something. I'm not saying everyone's like that, but God is questioning, yeah, tell me what, but tell me why. So then Kendrick answers, I donate to institutions. I put hoods on the stage, which could reference Not Like Us and the pop-out concert where he had people from different sets on the same stage. Him trying to say, look, I tried to bring these things. I tried bringing these people together who may hate each other. But then God says, wait a second, how could that be? Because you love war. It hits because it's like when you think you're good and someone pulls that secret only that you know about yourself, it hits me so much. It's revealing that little secret about himself, something that only he and God know about him. God is saying, don't lie to me. But all this putting hoods on stage and stuff, I know you. You love war. So tell me the truth. Right? You can't run, right? When someone knows your inner secrets, it's like, for example, you know you have a friend and they've said how much they hate someone else, and then suddenly you see them being all buddy-buddy with them, and then you're like, wait, tell me the truth. Like, why are you really talking to that person? I know you truly hate them. And your friend's like, oh, I just like them. I just like them now. And you're like, okay, you know it's a lie, right? Or like your spouse knows things about you. Your children, your parents know things about you that other people don't know, right? So God here is showing an example. I know that you like war. So stop telling me that you're trying to you did all this good stuff, bringing peace. Sometimes a woman can give of herself to a man just to want to feel security, right? We've seen these things. Sometimes men, they'll do all this stuff for women just because they want sex in return, right? You know, I'm super generalizing here, but these are just small examples of like, where are the hidden motives is what the question is. And those motives ultimately lead back to the person. And that's what the Father is trying to get at with Kendrick here. I love this conversation with God. Next line. Okay, then tell me the truth. Every individual is only a version of you. Like Kendrick is responding, okay, then tell me the truth. Every individual is a version of you. How can they forgive when there's no forgiveness in your heart? I could tell you where I'm going, Kendrick responds. I could tell you who you are, God responds. So Kendrick says, okay, if you know me so well, then just tell me the truth. Give it to me straight. Spit knowledge. And God responds, everyone around you has a piece of you in them. In this line by itself, it's a nice callback to the whole song itself, Reincarnated. It's him describing how all these little traumas are reincarnated through him and how he is a little piece of everyone's trauma from the past. And God telling him here, everyone is a version of you. So God saying all this you claiming about others is really about you. You want people to be good? Are you good? You want someone to forgive? Do you forgive? And this idea, it's really a strong one. The older I get personally, the more like this truly resonates with me. You question yourself, like, why are you doing this thing? And in this song, Pride from the Damn album, Kendrick says, I wouldn't blame you for mistakes I made for the bed I laid. Seems like I point the finger just to make a point nowadays. Smiles and cold stares, the temperature goes there. So even in Pride, he brought a lot of these themes. Kendrick responds to God, well, you know me, but I have these goals and I know where I'm trying to go. And God answers laughingly in a way, but I can tell you who you are. So it doesn't matter where you think you're going. You will always be you, and I know you. I love this idea and concept that Kendrick is showing through this conversation with God, because I also have these similar sentiments. A lot of people say things like, I want to leave this place. I need to get away, and I want to move away from here, because they want to be different. And for sure, yes, environment affects you, no doubt. But sometimes I would say, listen, wherever you go, you're still going to be you. You're going to have the same feelings, the same thoughts that you have. So if you really want to do and be better, then it may be that you need to work on yourself, not necessarily get away, right? Just another interesting idea. Next line. You fell out of heaven because you was anxious, didn't like authority, only searched to be heinous. Isaiah 14 was the only thing that was prevalent. My greatest music director was you. It was colors, it was pinks, it was reds, it was blues, it was harmony and motion. I sent you down to earth because you was broken. Rehabilitation, not psychosis. Now we hear now. Centuries you manipulated man with music. Embodied you as superstars to see how you moving. Came a long way from garnishing evilish views. And all I ever wanted from you was love and approval. All right, let's talk about this. Then God goes on this tirade, in a way telling Kendrick's story. He's saying his life, or this character, this humanized version of the devil. Like he's spitting facts about what's the truth here. And in this narration is how we start being very clear that this is a conversation between God and the devil. And him saying that Isaiah 14 is really the truth behind you. And you got to look at that if we want to understand like this concept, because I'm no theologian at all, but just reading into the basics of what's there, which is God explaining how the Babylonian king was cast away, even though he claims he wants to rise. And there is a direct parallel here to how Kendrick says, I want to go places, and how the Babylonian king is saying the same thing, but God is saying, no, you're not going anywhere because you're really low and you need to be cast away. So there's a direct correlation between the words in Isaiah 14 from the Bible and what's happening in this conversation. And then I do think there's like a callback to LA in general, where he says, my greatest music director was you. I brought you here, and maybe that the devil was supposed to be this like angel, but turned into this arch nemesis in a way. And that it was colors, it was pinks, it was reds, it was blues. Interesting, the red and blue maybe call back to LA, but it was harmony and motion. And I sent you down because you was broken. Rehabilitation. I sent you down to get you better. I cast you away so you can come back better. It's not that you're crazy and I wanted to damage you. It's that I wanted you to become better and learn. But here's where another clue in that this whole song is about the traumas of many musicians and of the culture at large, because he says, embody you as superstars to see how you moving. He didn't say, he could have, in this example, God could have said, I embodied you as a superstar. But here God is saying all of you and all the reincarnations, all the people, I embodied you all as superstars just to see how you moving, to test you. And here in this last line, the Father is saying something positive, saying after all this, you came a long way from garnishing evilish views. Like he wants to say you've grown so much through all this darkness. Next line, and this is the line that put me to tears. Kendrick's response, and all I ever wanted from you was love and approval. I learned a lot. No more putting these people in fear. The more that word is diminished, the more it's not real. The more light that I can capture, the more I can feel. I'm using words for inspiration as an idea. This line breaks me. Here's the punch that it gets me every time I listen to this song. I think this is one of the most heartfelt, emotional responses any human being can have one to anyone, but particularly God in this situation. Like God here in this example is basically breaking down Kendrick like crazy, breaking down the devil in his character, low-key dissing. And when someone speaks to you through only the things you would know, and you're like, damn, like how did that person know all this about me? And it hurts so much. And it's here, finally, instead of the devil responding like he did before, through resentment and hatred, the devil says, after being somewhat evolved, but all I ever wanted from you was love and approval. Like throwing it kind of back to God. Like, you know what? All I wanted was for you to love me, for you to accept me. It hits so hard. It's also a compliment to God in a way that I'm bad and you say I'm bad, but you know what? In the end, all I really wanted was for you to love me. I've genuinely teared up to these lyrics because it can resemble the obvious good versus evil, God versus devil, but you versus yourself, and you longing for goodness and godliness and wanting to be accepted by God and accepted by people at large, but you feel like you're not worthy and you want to be worthy. And now Kendrick responds by rebuking all of that evil, putting people in fear. And we get back to that word. I use lyrics to put people in awe, which is really fear and wonder, right? So now he's saying here, nice callback, that was a foreshadow for this area. No more putting people in fear. Next line. So God tells him, so can you promise that you won't take your gifts for granted? Then he says, I promise that I'll use my gifts to bring understanding. For every man, woman, and child, how much can you vow? God saying to him, I vow my life just to live one in harmony now. And God says, you crushed a lot of people keeping their thoughts in captivity. And I'm ashamed that I ever created that enemy. Then God says, and let's rejoice where we at. I rewrote the devil's story just to take our power back. Carnated. Now here, you can feel the conversation between God and Kendrick here. God questioning him, saying, all right, you ready? Are you not going to take what I gave you for granted? And he says, what can you vow for every man and woman and child? He says, I'll give my life to live one in harmony now. I will give everything away just to be at peace. And he says, you crushed a lot of people keeping their thoughts in captivity. And then he says, I'm ashamed that I ever created that enemy, that I final acceptance, that he's ashamed that he's done these, whatever Kendrick here wants to portray about evilish views, what he's done through lyricism. I don't think it's necessarily technically him through lyricism, but maybe just people at large and the evil and the traumas and all the things, the bad stuff that we dish out in this world. So I just love that line. I'm ashamed that I ever created the enemy. When God tells Kendrick, you did bad with your lyrics, instead of him arguing with him here, right? He admits it and basically agrees by saying, you're right. I admit it. And I'm ashamed that I ever did that. And this hits me because it brings the concept of shame, which is really strong. There's an amazing book by Brene Brown called Daring Greatly, which has a whole sociological perspective of the concept of human shame, which is so profound. Anyone should read it if they have the chance. Here, Kendrick admits shame, and it's definitely a step in the right direction, admitting your flaws. It's the devil finally agreeing with God and saying, you're right, so now I vow to do better. Now God says, okay, let's just be happy where we're at, right? It's like God not saying, okay, this is the answer, and now you're perfect. He's saying, okay, let's appreciate how far that we've come so far, at least for now. And the last line where Kendrick hits us with the clarity that this was all a retold version of the devil's story for him and Reincarnation. This last line, I think, is the one that we have to look at to go back to the whole third theory, which is that all of this may have been the story of the devil. Verse 1 and verse 2, as told through Kendrick's eyes and through his subconscious thoughts, through that past life regression hypnosis session. And then one thing I think people might sometimes miss is that at the end, or what it means is that he doesn't say throughout the whole song, he's saying reincarnated. He ends the song not by saying reincarnated. He goes carnated. And I think this sometimes goes unnoticed. Finally, after this in-depth talk with God, meaning now he's born again, anew. He's not coming back with the pieces of the trauma from all the other people, but in a way being born again as a brand new person, carnated.